465, hello. Just like the good old days, I'm sitting in my basement making a video for class because I have COVID. Yeah, who would have thought? Felt crappy towards the end of last week. Grabbed an old test that was sitting under the sink for several years and took that, and it came up positive. And I thought, there's no way that can be. There's no way I have COVID. So had a newer exam, newer test, took that one as well, and of course the old double bar that nobody wants to see. So here I am. Obviously, got to wait until I get a clear test before I can come back into work, and so your benefit then is online asynchronous class tonight. So this video will substitute then for the lecture. We're talking about communication. Today is going to be our topic. Let's revert back quickly to our lab from last week, which was Kevin O'Connell. Just a couple points on that. First and foremost, a kind of purposeful and intentional on my part, picking a coach. I think that's a leader that many of us kind of share in common, and oftentimes I think it's one of our first experiences with a leader is a coach that we might have for a program or a sport that we're involved in. And so I really kind of picked that one on purpose. And then O'Connell's a fascinating figure, and I think there's a few things then to kind of pull out from that. First and foremost, I think he's a great mixture of multiple different leadership styles. That was one of the questions on the lab. I think first and foremost, a very, very authentic person. Kind of who he is, who he is. He shows his cards. He doesn't hide a whole lot. He was kind of wounded a little bit as an athlete, a professional athlete, where he didn't quite get to kind of perform and play at the level that he wanted, nor have the career that he envisioned. But like he kind of mentioned, then it really set him up then to be a wonderful coach because he's able to identify and relate then to so many players kind of because of his struggles as a player. Definitely has some servant leader qualities where right his job then is to build other leaders. His job is to uplift. I think a few of you pointed out that he's got some transformational qualities as well, which is absolutely accurate. And then don't sleep on feministic kind of leadership theory. Not many people touched on that one, and I think he definitely has some feministic leadership qualities just in terms of his focus on relationships and how important those are, and trying to make things as equal as possible. He is the leader and he's ultimately in charge, but he tries to equalize things and keep players kind of on an even level with him as the head coach. And then obviously, I think you can make a good case for really any of the other leadership theories that we've talked about. With regard to leaders that have been seminal and kind of pivotal in his development, right, first and foremost, we've got to look at Belichick, who really kind of has these kind of great man trait theory sorts of things come to mind with Belichick. Belichick's a little bit more authoritarian, a little bit more directive kind of in his style. When it comes to Tom Brady then, who would have been the quarterback on the Patriots when O'Connell played, there's obviously some of those charismatic features, but Brady is just an incredibly charismatic leader. People just wanted to follow him, even when he got to Tampa Bay, who really, truthfully, was not that good of a team. Brady was able to elevate the people around him to the level of winning another championship, and I think he did a lot of that through his charisma. And he's obviously got some other leadership styles as well that he relies on. And then McVay, you make an argument for McVay that he's got all sorts of different leadership styles and is a blend of multiple different ones there as well. There's some charisma, there's some servant, there's some transformational, there's some authentic pieces with McVay as well. But ultimately the message there is that O'Connell, like I think all of us, is we're just kind of byproducts of the leaders that we've had in our life. And our goal then is to not necessarily focus on just one leadership style, but kind of take the best that we can from the different styles and the ones that fit us most appropriately, and kind of mix those together into a personal stew that ends up being kind of our own thumbprint in terms of leadership styles. And I think O'Connell has really done that well. And so he was kind of our kickoff in terms of leader coach. And I know a lot of you have interest in coaching or have even coached some already, which is awesome because coaches are such pivotal leaders in most, if not all, of our lives. So that's KOC. Tough year for the Vikings. They finished strong, but they were crappy early. And so it'll be interesting to see then how they kind of put things together for the following years. And of course, the quarterback that they let go just won a Super Bowl last night. So even more salt into that Viking wound, as if there haven't already been lots of Viking wounds over the course of their existence as a team. But I digress. You might sense that I am perhaps a recovering Vikings fan, and you'd be accurate. So again, as I mentioned, the topic for today is leadership and communication. And to orient you then to the slides, I've just kind of put the whole slide deck, the complete slide deck, onto the Canvas page so that you're not having to fill in gaps and holes. I just give you the whole notes, and that way you can kind of watch this video and maybe have the notes up at the same time. So at this point, I'm on slide 3, definition of leadership, which Phil Kornacek gave us, which is just leveraging influence to achieve an impact. And one of the key ways then that a leader can leverage influence is through the communication that she or he has with the people that are following her or him. Communication is absolutely vital, and that's why it sits kind of early in our curriculum here. There's a definition for it, specifically with regard to leadership there on slide 5. I'm not going to sit here and read those to you. That's going to be something I'll trust that you'll be able to do. But really what that does is just, again, recognize the importance of communication in terms of a leadership quality. It's really going to be difficult, if not impossible, to be a strong, effective leader if you do not have great communication skills. And as we all know, there's lots of different ways we communicate. We can do that orally. We can do that through a written format. We can do that even non-verbally through our actions and our behaviors. And so, again, communication is going to be paramount if we want to be an effective leader. In terms of communication, there can be, just like we've talked about this in terms of leadership styles, there can be 2 different types. There can be a task-oriented and a relationship-oriented. A task-oriented communication then is just going to be, we have to get something done, and I'm being directive, and I'm telling you then what needs to happen, versus a relationship-oriented communication, which again is much more interested in the relationship that we have with one another, and I'm going to support and recognize and try and develop you as subordinates through that kind of relationship-oriented communication that I have. Task-oriented is very clinical, like this is it, let's get this done, here's what we need to do. And then relationship, of course, is just much more focused on how you and I get along, and how I communicate, how we communicate with one another in terms of trying to accomplish some tasks. So overall then, there are different types of communication, 3 different types of communication if we're going to be specific. There's interpersonal, intrapersonal, and then nonverbal. And we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, just so you're on the same page as I am with regard to understanding what these are. So interpersonal communication then is just, it takes at least 2 people. So it's me and you, or me and a bunch of people having a conversation with one another. And again, as I've mentioned, we need to be able to do that really effectively if we're going to build our relationship and ultimately our leadership skills. Now, there's different styles, not Harry Styles. He's on the slide show, not Harry, but just styles in terms of leadership. And again, we've heard these terms before already: autocratic, consultative, participative, and laissez-faire. So again, in terms of how that interpersonal communication is going to happen, it can be very directive or one-sided, meaning I, as the leader, am basically directing or telling you what to do, and then it just slides along that continuum of more and more participation with regard to the subordinates or those people being led. They get a chance to contribute more and more to that conversation, to that communication, as we move to the right along that continuum, to the point where we finally get to laissez-faire and the leader is providing little or no direction from a communicative standpoint, and the followers then are basically having to interpret or figure out what needs to be done because they're not getting anything necessarily from the leadership position. Communication then can ultimately be direct or indirect. The challenge is that so much of our communication tends to be indirect. People don't like conflict, they don't like friction, they don't want to upset the apple cart, and so we have all these different ways or methods of indirect communication going on. I speak in code, or I talk in such a way that you don't understand, or I've got an issue with Tom, and instead of going direct to Tom with that, I tell Sally what's going on, somehow hoping that Sally communicates to Tom that I have an issue with him and that we need to fix it. And so one of the massive leadership communication challenges is that people are just so hesitant to provide direct communication when it's needed. If we can get better at that, the whole system is going to work more effectively. But again, it's so often it doesn't happen nearly as well as it could. And then we've got the example then of Coach and Jones. It might look a little goofy. It probably does, pardon my sense of humor. But Coach is telling Jones, hey man, what's up with these pork chops? And Jones has no idea what Coach is referring to and thinks that he's talking about food, and they're completely sideways. Of course, pork chops is slang or old person terminology for sideburns. And Coach has got a problem then with Jones having these nasty pork chops or sideburns when Coach has had a policy on the team that there's no facial hair. And Jones doesn't understand that, and Coach has a tough time being able to tell him directly what's happening there, and so you can see how sideways this conversation got very, very quickly. It's the next slide then, you can see the kind of 4 different bubbles. What's the speaker mean to say? What are the speaker's biases, the listener's biases, and then what the listener actually heard. It's similar to that old game of telephone or whatever you want to call it, where you whisper something in somebody's ear and then they tell it to somebody else and they tell it to somebody else, and by the time you've run it through 4 or 5 or 8 or 10 different people, it's a completely different message by the time it's over. Because again, I know what I want to say as the speaker, but I've got my own biases and limitations and prejudices and all of that, and I try and communicate that message to you, and you're going to run that through your own personal lenses, and you've got biases and fallacies and all of that as well, and then ultimately what comes out might not be what I intended or what I thought my original message was. And I think we've all probably got an experience with that. Texts are notorious for that, right? We text something to somebody and we think we know what we're trying to say or what we mean, and they go way off. They don't understand at all what we meant, totally misinterpret what our message was. And then one of the other problems with text is, right, we don't have the chance to see the person. It's indirect. It's not personal, and so we don't know. They can't see how we're responding or looking or perhaps feeling, and so we can get very, very sideways quickly. Emails very, very similar. What we might have intended as the message isn't what ends up coming across, and that's oftentimes, again, because it's so impersonal in nature. Next, then, in terms of interpersonal communication, is we've got this thing called levels of meaning, and that complicates things even further. We've got kind of a content component and a relational component. So the content component is what I meant to say, what the actual words are, and the relational component is kind of that relationship behind that message. And so an example would be, and I won't swear on here because it's going to be recorded, but I'll try and use a cleaner example, which is like if I tell you to piss off. If you and I are very, very close and we've been friends for a long period of time, I tell you to piss off. You don't take that personally. You know that that's not a personal attack on you. That's just, you and I are friends, and that's part of the way that we communicate with one another, and we've got a strong relationship behind that. But if we didn't know that, if we didn't have that relationship, and I told you to piss off, and you took that personally and very, very directly, now we've got an issue. Now we've got a challenge. So the actual content of that message, piss off, is not great. It's not positive. It's we might even throw hands if that's how this conversation is going to go. But when we add in a relational component, now it gets more complicated, much more complicated, because when I say something like piss off, you didn't take it personally. You just know that I'm mad at you, or you got one up on me, and that's about the best comeback that I can have. So again, that relational component complicates communication as well, because sometimes one party or the other doesn't know that I might have been kidding, or I might have been joking, or I didn't mean it personally, and you took it at the true kind of content component meaning of that message. Next one then is kind of the nonverbal communication. We all know how important nonverbal communication is. There's these studies out there that attempt to decipher and interpret how much of human communication is nonverbal in nature, and oftentimes right there at the 70 or 80% kind of figure, that 70 to 80% at times of our communication is based on nonverbal things versus the actual verbal message that we might have communicated. So when that's the case, it's important then to realize, what do we say with our body? So what's our body communicating to other people? And then if you are a leader, what does the body language of your followers say? Are they in alignment with you? Are they listening really, really carefully? Or are they closed off and defensive? And so we need to, as leaders, pay very, very careful attention, not only to what we're saying with our body language, but what the body language then of our players is, of our followers, of the workers that are under us, or whatever. We need to be very astute and very tuned in to what the body language is of the folks that are following us, and that's going to come in terms of their physical appearance, their posture, the gestures that they might display, body position that they might be holding, touching, facial expression, inflection in their voice. All of those are very, very important nonverbal cues. The next slide then just is kind of fascinating. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, these are easily worth that, if not more. Just two different snapshots in time. The first one, upper left, is obviously Parcells and Joe Gibbs, so it's dated somewhat. These are two former NFL football coaches. But if you can just look at that picture and tell these guys don't like each other. The Cowboys won on this day because Parcells really wants to stare him down and look in his eye, and he's got that second hand up there to grab onto that handshake. That's a power move, big time. And Joe Gibbs, now into the NASCAR world, but again, then at that time, a head coach for the Redskins. Right, this is a formality. Coaches have to shake hands after a game. It's just an unwritten rule that if you violate that, you're in serious circumstances as a leader of a football team. So you have to go through this formality, but Gibbs wants nothing to do with it. So he just wants it to be over with. Turning away, not looking him in the eye, all of that sort of thing. So you can decipher a lot about this relationship and what happened in this contest simply from that quick picture in time. The bottom right picture is completely different. Jill Ellis, Pia Sondhag, coaches at different times of the U.S. women's national team in soccer. Sondhag then, I think, went and became the head coach of the Swedish team, which was where she's from initially. But you can see these two women have tremendous respect for one another. They like each other, even though they've got the same ambitions and have coached the same team. There's clearly not this level of animosity or friction that we see in the picture of Parcells and Gibbs, and yet the similarities are way outweigh the differences in terms of, like, it's two coaches of two very, very high-powered teams, and yet two vastly different kind of methods of communication. Intrapersonal communication then is kind of the the last one, and that's just the self-talk that we have. And we know that sometimes we're our biggest fan, but unfortunately, oftentimes we are our own biggest critic, and that comes into play then with regard to how we talk to ourselves. And so, as a leader, we need to be very aware of kind of what that internal dialogue is and what that inner chatter is, and hopefully we're believing in ourselves and have as much faith in ourselves as we possibly can. Ultimately, there's 5 communication responsibilities. If we keep these in mind, we're going to be much more effective in terms of our leadership. And basically then brief, debrief, acknowledge and understand messages, communicate hazards to others, and then lastly, ask if you don't know. So that just means brief. Like if we're going to have let's just use a sport environment, a practice. Brief would be, okay, here, start a practice, going to give you a quick idea of what we're going to do today, a rundown of sorts. The debrief is kind of, okay, after we've had practice, let's talk about how it went, things that went well, things that we might need to do differently, things we can improve on, that sort of thing. Acknowledge and understand messages is the third thing, which again is just if somebody asks you something or hits you up, that you follow up and you address that question, right? Again, texts are classic for this. Somebody will start a text thread and then there's no response, and you're left wondering, oh, did they get the message? Do they know? Do they understand? Communicate hazards to others, which is just like if you're aware of something that might be hazardous, it just makes sense then that you pass that along to other people so that they know, especially people who might be influenced or impacted by whatever this thing is that you now found out about. And then the last one is, like, if you don't know, ask. That social psychology comes in so powerfully, and people are afraid, or they don't want to be singled out, or they don't want to be that person. But if you don't know, ask, because if you don't know, there's chances are that somebody else doesn't know as well. So just power through and throw your hand up or fire off that email or whatever and say, hey, I'm just not understanding this. Can you provide some clarity for me? Big question then, how do we communicate more directly? That's going to be on slide 25. The best way to do that is through iMessages, not iMessages, but iMessages, which basically capture behavior, emotion, and effect. So I tell people what the behavior is in question. I let them know how I'm feeling about it, and I also let them know what the effect is. And so you can see examples then of each of those, of what the behavior. We need to identify the behavior specifically. We need to let them know how we feel about it and what effect it has. So an example would be, hey, when I'm speaking and you cut me off like that, it makes me frustrated. And it makes it difficult for me to try and get my complete message out. Okay, so there, I've captured all 3 components. I've singled out the person that I've got the issue with. I let them know the behavior they're doing. They're cutting me off. They're not letting me finish. I let them know how I'm feeling about it. It frustrates me. And I let them know what effect I think that's having. It's not allowing me to fully communicate the message that I want to deliver. All right, very, very quickly. The challenge is we don't usually speak that way, and it takes practice and it takes work. But if we're able to do that, it's going to make us so much more effective. So with Jones and the coach whole fiasco conversation thing, that might look like coach saying, being more specific with Jones, saying, hey, Jones, your sideburns are an issue for me. I'm frustrated. I'm mad about that because I felt like I was clear in the policy and the rules that we can't have facial hair. And yet here you are, and that makes me feel like you're not listening to some of the rules that I've got in place. So there you go. We've got all 3 out. The challenge is we tend to talk in you messages, and there's a word oftentimes that sits in front of that you, which I'm not going to say, but either that comes out directly or it's indirectly implied, which basically are you suck messages. Like instead of being an I message of telling them what they're doing, how I feel about it, and what effect I think it is having, instead I just basically say, you suck, you piss me off, you're making me mad. And so then lastly, why do iMessages work? Well, it lets people know who you're talking to. So you specifically say, and if necessary, use their name to get their attention, and you identify what behavior it is that they're doing, and then how you feel about it. And then lastly, what the effect is that you think it's having. When you are able to tell somebody that some behavior that they're engaging in is having an emotional impact on you. It's frustrating me, it's confusing me, it's angering me. That connects directly to their subconscious then, and they have to pay attention to it. And so that's why iMessages are so powerful. Just like everything, we have to practice them. So my homework for you is to, when appropriate, go practice an iMessage. And the beauty of them is oftentimes things that are communications that are difficult to have. Like I'm just not quite sure how am I going to say that to that person. So we've got time to think about it. We can craft an iMessage. We can sit down and actually write it out and practice it and say, okay, this is how I'm going to deliver this. All right, that does it for our communication. Thanks for your attention. So Lab 3 is sitting up on the Canvas page. Read through the directions. It's an email submission to me due by Wednesday night by 11:59 p.m., so just a little bit before midnight. And then also our first quiz is today, and so the window for that is 4 to 7 tonight. So between the hours that class is, you've got to get in and take that quiz on the Canvas page. Let me know via email if you have any questions or concerns or issues. I'll be checking that throughout the day. And with that being said, again, next week is a holiday, and so it'll be 2 weeks then before we see each other again face to face. Later. If I can figure out how to stop my... There we go. Bye.